Also, I'm fighting a discrimination case myself in ACT just on basic human rights for the Ngarigu people. So I know how the refugees feel, because we're all in the same boat when you think about it. Like I said, the natives still fighting for their land and their basic human rights in Australia. So I'd like to welcome the refugees on our land, and on Aboriginal culture. I just want people to know that our culture is based on caring and sharing for the people and the land.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm here on behalf of unions in Canberra to express our solidarity for the struggle that we've heard so much about today. The inhumane treatment of refugees, the treatment in detention centres, the shameful, disgraceful period of history that we're all living through and that we're so desperately fighting together to actually overturn. It will be a sweet day when we see the end of the hideous detention system that now is a shame on all of us. And unions and the workers that I represent, we are fighting hard with you to ensure our members stand beside in solidarity in the struggle of overturning the racist, the inherently racist nature of this policy. Nobody is illegal. Everyone is human. The behaviour we have seen since the election of the Abbott government is a shameful indictment on a crumbling democracy. The Labor Party with refugee policy started the rot. The Liberals are completing the rot.
On the first Tuesday in November, when Australia was in its default mode, we're all enjoying the race that stops the nation. We're all eating and drinking. All feeling the wonder and beauty of the life that we have to share in this nation. And we're in our default mode, and the hundreds and thousands of images that were tweeted on that day, images of Gay Waterhouse holding the cup up and the horse going first past the post. The most retweeted image on that day was a church sign. And this sign said, "The nation that stops many races." There is one thing that we have to come to terms with, one thing that is so hard for us to understand and to appreciate, and perhaps impossible for Tony Abbott to understand and appreciate, something that people who are getting on boats trying to get to this nation understand deeply and personally. And that is, there are worse things than death. Yeah. We don't understand that. There are worse things than death.
I've spent nearly 3 years of my life in detention centre in Nauru as a child when I was 10 years old. And Nauru, the detention centre, was just horrible. The condition, the lack of medical assistance, people with psychotic disorders, mental illnesses, depression, all sort of diseases that you can think about. And with that, we had all the little kids, you know, they were witnessing people who were trying to commit suicide. I was on a temporary protection visa for 3 years. They told us after 3 years we're going to decide whether you're going to live in Australia or you're going to go back to your country, Afghanistan. But luckily for me, after 3 years, they gave me my permanent residency. And it was after 8 years that I went and got reunited with my parents that were in Pakistan. And it was really an emotional reunion, you know, because it was after 8 years. I was 18 when I saw my mum and dad again. And I'm really proud of my parents, you know. They have given me another life here in Australia. At the moment, I go to university. I'm studying a double degree in law and management. I have just completed a diploma of interpreting with RMIT, and with that I can help all those people that are within detention centers who cannot speak English, and I would be able to interpret for them. You know what? I want to tell this to Tony Abbott today, that Australia is full of refugees, except for Indigenous people. They're the real people of Australia. We are just seeking an ordinary life, like an ordinary people that live in Australia, just like you guys. We're just seeking an ordinary life. That's it. Don't we have that right to be a human?
We can't pretend any longer that we don't know the consequences of indefinite detention, and the detention in particular of children. Knowingly detaining, taking the lives of these children away, punishing them because their parents, their siblings, their uncles, their aunts, their family dared to give them a chance, is actually creating, I fear, the next damaged generation. But we live in a region where not everybody is so lucky. Whether it's in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Burma, Australia has an international responsibility to help look after those who are in desperate need of protection. Tony Abbott's policies, followed closely, led in some regards by the Labor Party, have diminished us as a country. They have, Mr. Morrison and Tony Abbott want you to believe that nobody cares. They want you to believe that people think it was right to detain Mohammed at the age of 10 years old for 3 years in an island prison. It is not right. It is wrong. And we don't have to do it like that. We've seen Tony Abbott's display of gutlessness over the weekend, where he wasn't prepared to say anything about human rights in Sri Lanka. Of course, that suits his political agenda. That suits his political agenda because he wants to send all refugees who come from Sri Lanka back there. That's against international law. And it is not in line with Australia's obligations. It is not illegal to seek asylum in Australia. TPVs are happening now. I've moved a motion in the Parliament to disallow TPVs. It will be voted on December the 2nd. What will the Labor Party do? I hope that they do exactly what they did in 2008, which was to stand up for fairness, stand up for human rights. This is about our national identity. It is about our national spirit. We are the country of a fair go. Tell Tony Abbott he's the one who's got it wrong.
In a few phrases, Gail Jones put it so well in the new excellent anthology, A Country Too Far, which has just been published, and I quote, "An aerial shot circles the container ship like God assessing its human cargo, a sliding, precarious load. The Afghans, a mere pattern of men, for some reason sitting on the deck, in rows, apparently quiet and obedient. The distance made them paltry and inconsequential," end quote. Thus we watched with indifference. They were hardly human, let alone like us. What we didn't know, but would all have been moved by it if we had, was that the women were in containers with walls too hot to touch. And in Gail's words again, I quote, "The air was still and putrid. 2 pregnant women were weak with vomiting. The container next to them was the latrine, awash with their waste and sour with the stench of human bodies. The truth is, no one being persecuted escapes their own country without the help of smugglers. In many countries, it is considered a necessary and respected profession. But like any profession, a lot of people smugglers are profit-seeking and, yes, scoundrels. But there are also some who are genuine humanitarians trying to help their countryfolk. I'm sure all of us here would do something to save our own families, or do anything to save our own families. Mostly they're in between. They want to help, but they also need money. A large percentage are asylum seekers themselves trying to get to Australia, who have found a means to survive in a country, Indonesia, where it was impossible to get a job. Anyway, the big fish are mostly Indonesians, behind the scenes, often in high positions in government, the military, navy and big business. They are pretty much the only ones that make a lot of money out of smuggling. The Indonesian authorities are not going to hand these big fish over to Australians. Why should they? The money they make filters down and goes around.
Jesus, in one of his well-known stories or parables, had this fabulous parable where he was talking about who are the people that are in right with God. And the people who are in right with God are the people who give a glass of water to somebody who's thirsty, who feed somebody who's hungry, and who welcome into their homes someone who is a stranger in need. It's a foundational part of our Christian faith. It's a sense of hospitality for the stranger. So people who follow the good book, the Holy Bible, have no choice really but to welcome asylum seekers and refugees who come here legally, exercising their human rights and their legal rights under the United Nations obligations, honour international human rights conventions. We could do with an awful lot more of that in Australia. One of the most galling things for me as a leader of a Christian church here in Australia is that at the moment we have Tony Abbott, who professes a strong Christian faith. We have known Kevin Rudd, who professes a strong Christian faith. The now leader of the opposition, Bill Shorten, professes a strong Christian faith. But none of them apply their Christian faith to the question of asylum seekers and refugees. It's a shameful hypocrisy, and we in the churches are appalled by that.
We need to stop calling refugees illegals. The government needs to distance itself from that terminology, because that moves us from the fact that they are people. Refugees are people. We need to see them as people, and we need to welcome them to Australia with open arms, because they have committed no crime. They want to come to Australia in search of opportunity, in search of a better life, and we should not deny them that opportunity. The Iranian Women's Association is also concerned about the over 3,000 Iranian refugees considered to be protected persons under Article 27 of the 4th Geneva Convention, who are currently situated at Camp Liberty. Camp Liberty is a camp which is inside Iraq. They were attacked by the Iraqi forces at the behest of the Iranian regime. The Iraqi forces and the Iranian regime orchestrated a massacre on the 1st of September, which led to the murder of 52 Iranian refugees. And it led to the abduction of 7. Those 7 hostages are being held in a prison behind Prime Minister al-Maliki's office, and they've been on hunger strike since the 1st of September this year.
This week, we saw Australia being singled out around the world because of the way our government dances with brutal regimes around the world. Australian government is being singled out around the world because of the way our government treats asylum seekers and refugees. It is heartbreaking to know that as a Tamil, that in Australia, major political parties not only bash the refugees for political gain. This week we saw Tony Abbott government defending Sri Lanka's human rights record. And we have an opposition that agrees with Tony Abbott government defending Tamil genocide. Tamil refugees flee Sri Lanka for obvious reasons. They flee persecution by the Sri Lankan state. In 2009, over 70,000 Tamils were killed by the Sri Lankan army. And according to the bishop, Catholic bishop in northern Sri Lanka, Bishop Rajapu Joseph, over 146,000 Tamils went missing. Many believed dead.
To the 300, around 300 Tamil asylum seekers who are now in prison in Negombo because they were returned not just by the Abbott government but because they were returned by a Rudd government and by a Gillard government before that. They remain a testament to the shameful collaboration between the Australian government and a ruthless dictator Rajapaksa, and even a conservative Prime Minister like Cameron from the United Kingdom could find some shred of decency to mention the issue of the Tamils. And what did Tony Abbott do? He expressed his understanding of why Rajapaksa perhaps has tortured people in the past and will torture people again. That is not our understanding. It will never be our understanding. So on Nauru at the moment it's probably about double this temperature, about 40 degrees, at a place where you have to walk about 10 minutes before you can even see a trickle of running water, where someone turns the showers on for 4 or 5 minutes and then turns them off, and you have to be finished showering in that kind of time, where there are no education facilities in the camp, where there's no place to look after young children, where you stand for an hour in temperatures much hotter than this to have meals, and you can't take meals away back to the kids in the tent. If you're not in the queue, there's no food. That's what Nauru represents, and that's why it's not just women and children and families that need to come off Nauru. Everyone has to come off Nauru. Nauru must be closed. Abbott, Morrison, hear us say.